You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
Das Boopid. Hey, Jeebles. Welcome to another episode of On the Trail with Kevin Scott. I would be Scott, the slapstick parts guy that continually forgets to bring up the lines and understand what the beginning of the show is.
And I'm Kevin, the engineer, who can actually read his script. The general Jeep tech guy, the guy who reads instructions, uses the right tools, and follows those instructions.
And likes to scare the alphabet soup out of Scott with the Pitman arm puller.
Well, those things happen.
Yeah, but while we will...
And if you don't understand that comment, look at the show 91.
91. This is 92.
No, show 90. So, as always, while we will share what worked for us, as well as probably what didn't, that's maybe more important, it's really up to you to choose to do what you want to do with your Jeep. So, as we always say, please do your research. Read them instructions.
Doesn't matter if they're in Braille 2.0, in a PDF format, and or in paper. Make sure you read and follow them.
Please. And by the way, if you use Braille, I'm glad you're listening to this show.
Yes.
Scott really didn't mean anything negative about that.
No, not at all.
Okay. So, as you said, we are on to show 92.
Yes.
It's nice the show numbers are bigger than my age. That's good.
Well, this one's going to be a gas.
Yeah, well, I guess it is. This is a show brought to you because people are asking us a lot of questions, and sometimes it's easier just to do a show than to try and write a bunch of replies.
Emails, yes. Well, what brought on this subject is, I feel like I'm in my high school years again, because gas is where I was when I was in high school, and I'm grounded. So on that note. So these shows are pre-recorded, obviously, folks. So hopefully by this time the world hasn't ended and you're still listening. But with that, the gas prices are really, 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 really low, which of course brings out the Facebook and social media experts. Mm-hmm. So when a few questions were asked, and I actually I always wondered something myself when it came to fuels, and I remember Amica Ultimate used to be the biggest thing, and I ran that in my mini truck, my 85 Isuzu Pup. I ran Amica Ultimate because I fell for the whole, hey, this is something where it burns clean and it's clear fuel and doesn't have any impurities.
You never had to go by the was it Sunoco race fuel that always used to be on the Sunoco stations?
Dude, I had guys dumping cans of 108 octane boost in their Mitsubishi Monteros trying to drive them fast.
And did it run any better?
I have no idea. That was so long ago.
Or did
honestly,
they honestly just kind of what is it that you believe what you want to believe kind of a thing?
Are you talking about placebo effect?
No, but the same sort of thing. That you're you keep dreaming and you think you feel it a little bit better, and it runs better.
Yeah. My seal, the pans and dyno works really good.
Anyway.
So this I guess episode is going to be about fuel and gas, because a lot of questions were raised. What fuel should I run in my JK?
And
whatever.
With the restaurant closures, that that he's not talking about that kind of gas.
Yeah. Short byline, I was at lunch the other day, and I was eating a bean burrito and hot sauce, and everyone looks at me and go, "Hey man, 6 feet means 6 feet."
Yeah, Klingon.
Exactly. So, but anyways, so to be honest with you, I'm going to rewind back to when I was younger, and when I was younger, I didn't know about checking miles driven versus gallons used, and I just thought it made the car faster. Mm-hmm. And I fell into that, 93. I'm gonna be good to the car. I'm gonna give it a tank of 93.
Gotcha.
And I did. Yep. And to me, it always made the car more peppier. And
this is what I was talking about did it really, or was it just because you expected it to? Your mind kind of made it better.
It's kind of like the old V-Power spark plug,
Well, and that's one of the things that everybody goes. Scott, I'll ask you, do you really know what octane means?
Do I really know what octane means in a very broad spectrum? Yes.
Okay.
But I have questions.
Okay.
Octane is how hard it is for the gas to ignite in a very broad spectrum term.
Yeah, close.
And do one of the questions get right into, does higher octane gas burn hotter?
Okay. Octane is a number created as a scale that shows the resistivity of a fuel blend to self-ignite, spontaneously explode under heat and pressure.
All right.
So the higher the number, the greater the amount of heat and pressure the fuel can not spontaneously combust.
So higher octane would be better for a higher compression engine.
Exactly. That's where it's made for. If you're squeezing an air fuel, did you guys in high school, your physics or chemistry professor ever have that little plastic or glass tube with a plunger that he put a piece of cotton down in and smack it real hard and you'd see it flash and burn up?
No, we weren't allowed to have that.
Well, that was a neat demo that showed how compressed air gets hot. And those of us that have vehicles that don't use spark plugs know all about compression ignition.
Dazzle.
Okay. So the whole thing about octane is the higher the number is not, it has more power. It's not, it's going to make the car run faster. It's not any of those better things. All it says is it's less likely to pre-detonate. Pre-detonation, i.e. ping, or in some cases knock, although knock is normally more a mechanical problem.
Right, yeah.
But
that's why newer vehicles, fuel-injected vehicles, had knock sensors.
Knock sensors so they can reduce timing.
Yeah.
That, my friend, is where the power comes from. The faster you run an engine, the further up the torque curve you are, but the faster you run an engine, the earlier you need the spark in a spark ignition engine for the flame front, i.e. the gasoline, to burn. You don't want it to explode. You want it to burn.
Right.
And it's a literal flame front. If you think of a picture where they've slowed down and a bomb going off and you see that circular wave going across of pressure, that's a burn. And that's what you want in the engine. That pushes the piston down, as opposed to pre-det, which is the equivalent of hitting it with a sledgehammer.
Right.
And, most pistons are aluminum. You can't imagine. It doesn't take too many hammer blows before they start to have fragments of piston in the oil pan.
Well, we make jokes at work calling time to change the rocks out of the motor to new rocks.
Yes. So all we're looking for is a level of pre-det control. Aircraft engines, particularly, the not jets, but the piston-powered ones, had to have 100 and 110 octane, not because they were that high of a compression per se, but when you boost them with a turbocharger, you're putting them a lot of pressure and a lot of heat. So
that's when you get a dome-top piston.
Correct. You don't want the fuel to decide when the ignition time is. Yeah. You want the spark, i.e. the computer, to do it so that it matches your power curve. So if you're fighting pre-det, and this is back in the earlier days of mechanical advances and vacuum advance ignitions, you really needed a higher octane to be more forgiving, not more powerful.
Is that why you need higher octane and higher altitudes?
It helps because, again, at higher altitudes, if you're working with a boosted engine to make up for that altitude difference, yes. Otherwise, the truth is there's more power in regular than there is in terms of pure BTUs than there is in premium.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, when you talk about like more power,
there's more BTUs. Power in any fuel is British thermal units of combustion. That is the conversion from, what's it put out in energy. You can also do it in joules. You can do it in watts. You can do it any form of energy. Typically in fuels, it's BTUs. Okay. Anything you burn, you think about a BTU. So there's more BTUs in a regular gas. Hence, diesels. Diesel is even lower. Yeah,
because you want that.
And that's they use cetane numbers, but the same general idea is you even have more energy per liter, or, per ounce, per whatever volume.
Right.
In a diesel fuel, it just really takes 20-to-1 compression to get enough heat to it ignites. Now, that's why diesels rattle, is they do use auto ignition.
Right.
In other words, they compress the air to the point that it's hot enough to make the diesel fuel self-ignite. The good news is Diesel being a inherently much more resistant to explosive, non-volatile, basically fuel, burns on self-ignition. It doesn't explode with that all-consuming that gasoline does. That's volatility.
Right.
And obviously, the higher the volatility, really it's a speed thing. You ever heard of, they talk about explosives in terms of how fast it is.
Right.
And that's because the flame front progresses through the material at a higher and higher and higher speed, makes it essentially more and more volatile.
Okay.
So for you in a Jeep, if your engine doesn't need it for pre-detonation, you're actually better off running a regular. Okay. Now, there's a lot of grades of regular. There's rot gut
87.
Regular. No, I'm talking about the ones from no-name pumps that are really the dregs of the fuel tanks from the fuel farm.
Real quick question.
Yeah.
On that note, going back to the Amoco Ultimate Premium and all that, again, you got GDI engines. You got intake valve where, when carburetors used to mix the air and fuel together, you could gum up your intake valves.
Yep.
Right? But in fuel injection vehicles, I see all the time they have the picture of the valve, all the gum on top of it.
Yep.
That's pretty much doesn't happen anymore because the fuel is injected.
Disagree.
Disagree?
Disagree.
Well, the top of the fuel can help keep that buildup from happening on the intake valves.
Correct. The thing is, there's two kinds of injection in gasoline engines
There's
these days.
GDI.
GDI is...
which does do the pre-fuel.
Well, GDI... Well, I'm going to frame it... There's direct inject, where the fuel is injected into the combustion chamber. Most vehicles still don't run that. If your injectors go into the intake manifold, they are not direct injection into the combustion chamber. They are pouring in, and actually the injector is focused at the back of the intake valve.
Okay.
So if you are running cheap fuel that does not have the right admixtures, is what's called a crossover blend. I'm not going to go into the whole science of moving fuels, but most of it comes through a pipeline before it ever gets to the truck. And the pipelines are essentially buried trucks. They're not owned by the fuel company. They're owned by a separate party, and that pipeline can carry a little bit of everything. And so today it's hauling jet fuel. Tomorrow it's gasoline. The day after that, it's some oil product. And there are the tail ends where the two materials mix.
Okay.
And some of the cheaper no-name gas can come kind of towards that tail end. And, if it's tail end mixed with, 100 aviation gas, yeah, not a problem.
Hey, win-win for you.
On the other hand, if it's coming through, on the tail end of diesel.
That's how you can also get bad gas. So is it true what I read is that all gas pretty much comes from the same supplier then?
No, they each come from their own refineries, but they're monitored and tagged, usually by a unique fluorescent ID.
Okay.
And so you can tell, and it's one of those materials that if you mix the two, they change colors, so they can pretty much... Okay, we're running clean. Check over here. And so there's a allotted loss. Now, really, what they'll tell you is that the switching points, the slug of blended fuels, isn't as big as you think it would be because there's no turbulence in these pipelines to cause mixing. So you do end up with a pretty much defined slug, and it simply goes into a tank and goes back for re-refining and to separating into its correct. But there's always some of that questionable fuel that's been in the tank too long, that's been overaged, is sold at a discount because it doesn't have the additives in the fuels that the prime names. A lot of what differentiates the fuels isn't necessarily what you're talking about as feedstock that is refined. They're all working in the same temperature band, the same materials, condensing out on each one of the distillery plates to collect the gasolines from this level to this level, the diesels from this level to this level, the butanes, heptanes. But the additives are the anti-wear, the anti-corrosion, the non-foaming, the stabilization materials. Gasoline is volatile because of the, surprise, volatile ingredients.
Right.
The ones that vaporized most quickly. Well, liquid fuel doesn't burn.
Right.
Only vapor does. Okay. that's gone to a gaseous state, and we've been through that before. If you're buying fuel that's been sitting so long that all of those more volatile elements have boiled off, you're going to have a harder to ignite fuel. And not in the way that we talked about in the other show on octanes.
Yeah.
It just flat out doesn't want to light up. Think about stale gas in the gas can. Okay. Your lawnmower just doesn't want to start.
And that's the thing I was getting ready to say, is that what people don't realize is gasoline and fuel is organic. It's got a shelf life, especially the stuff with the ethanol blends now, because at work, we see, fuel tanks sometimes that are just gummed up because the car is set for 6 months, and hey, my car won't start. Well, you got varnish and gum and all this, but it's not a lawnmower. Well, again, fuel is organic.
Yeah, it does degrade over time.
Yeah.
Actually, I remember reading an article, this was several years ago, may have been a decade ago, that talked about the shelf life of fuel, non-stabilized fuel.
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about anything you put Stabil or any one of those other treatments in there.
We'll get to those in a minute.
Yeah. Was only like 2 to 3 weeks. So, when you buy fuel, and then if you don't drive your vehicle a lot, it can, in fact, go stale in the tank. And when the volatiles go off the top end, and everybody kind of gets that, the gasoline doesn't have that sharp tang anymore to it. It's kind of got that dry stink, of old stale gas. Well, the bottom end falls out too. And that's the heavier stuff that comes out of suspension and ends up plating the bottom of your fuel tank and becoming a sludge, or that yellow varnish. If you've, like me, and ever worked on old vehicles that have been around forever, there's that yellow varnish that glues float needles.
Well, and that's why everyone has to be careful. This Jeep's never been driven. It's been sitting in the barn. It's ready to go. It's Friday. No.
There's too many things I've heard for that. That just scares me no end.
And that's the thing that other people understand. Like, even gaskets can go stale. Like, they don't draw oil because it pulls in oil to keep everything. Yeah, that's another story.
So anyway, octanes, 87, 89 to 90, 91 to 94. Those are the three normal layers of regular, mid-grade, premium. Here's one for you. You ever seen the little thing under the that says, "Hey, it's done by the RM over 2 method"?
Your what is how bad? You might want some ointment for that.
Yeah, no. Have you ever seen the little label that right there that says the octane determined by RM over 2 method? That's on
not.
the pump. Yeah.
No, I don't know.
Well, it's on every pump. And it basically, it's what they're telling you is they're averaging 2 different tests.
Okay.
One called the motor octane rating, which really is a test they run with a little motor. And they set it up with the fuel with a knock sensor on it, and they advance the timing until it knocks, and they can say, well, this can handle this much advance. And the other one is the research octane rating, which is a little lab test that, your guy with the beaker and the thing that he's over here dying, folks.
I'm so dying because I don't think Kevin realizes this. We're on the U.S. Energy Information Administration website. And if you look where you saw, the more motor octane rating and research octane rating, moron.
No, I didn't see that.
That's why I'm dying laughing, because it's literally, and it's a government website, moron. I'm sorry. And then you talk about beaker, and then I literally, the Bunsen honeydew, I literally almost had a let her rip moment. Call back to the other show.
I can see that.
Okay,
so basically,
continue.
they just take those 2 test results, because one is a lab test.
Right.
And the guys in the pipeline business and the refineries really like the pipeline tests.
Oh, of course.
But the government likes the one with the actual motor, which is a real life test. So
see, other guys don't like.
Yeah, well, because it's more work, more cost, and more time. So basically, the government says, we're going to take the 2 of those, add them together, and divide by 2, and that's the average of the 2 tests. So
I have to take a picture of that just for the Instagram. I'm sorry, because that is just too funny. You literally have the moron.
He's putting 2 distinct phrases together, but that's fine.
Yeah, but you got to understand, like, sometimes the planets align for a joke, dude.
Now, There are, regular can be called unleaded, mid-grade super or super premium, but they're really all talking about octane. And so that the best way for you to determine what you need in your Jeep is simple.
Read the owner's manual.
Owner's manual.
Yeah.
Unless you make changes. Now, that's my example of my Edelbrock head.
Right.
Okay. Now, it's actually rated for regular gas. Mm-hmm. All right. However, there is notes in the instructions on that in occasions where you're doing other upgrades, you may have to move upwards.
Yeah.
But they designed it to get its California, the carb ratings. It had to be able to run as the manufacturer intended.
Suggested.
But if you're running Ron Stroker, okay, he's running 11-to-1 a compression ratio.
So he needs it.
He can't. He drives by a regular pump and it starts to ping and knock. So he's pretty much stuck in the premium world.
Two very quick questions.
Yep.
Now you talked about the carb rating and all that, but my biggest wonder is that when JKs say, "Oh well, I have got the super tuner and I run the 93 tune."
Okay.
How can you get the same? Okay, how would that benefit you being a 93 tune, but your engine is still a lower compression engine?
Because the ability for it to one of the ways you end up with ping is excessively advanced timing.
Okay.
And so instead of now that lets you have higher revs, which can produce more power. Okay. So without changing compression, if you're going to go with a 93 tune, I don't know this because I haven't seen the map, but they probably changed the fuel flow, the engine timing, and the shift points to allow the engine to build to a higher rev level than factory, which in the factory situation would probably result in pinging.
Okay.
So they're basically overriding the knock sensor. Well, they're not really overriding the knock sensor. They're basically pushing the engine up where the knock sensor on regular would be pulling off timing to stop the knock or the ping.
So for those computer, you're overclocking your processor.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much. You're pushing the limits that way. You're not getting as much benefit as the guys who'll go and shave the head of the engine and remount it and put high compression dome top pistons and get her up to 11-to-1, but they're probably going to blow the bottom end apart anyway. Yeah. One of the things that's sad, but also requirement of economics is the fact that the days of overbuilt engines, the great engines that you could play with coming out, they were all designed in the late 50s, early 60s, the Chevy, small block Chevy, the small block Fords, the big blocks where, oh, wow, I can stroke this one. I can, shave this one and get, I can overbore and put these connecting rods, the 383 stroker, the Chevy 383 stroker, the engine that never was, the greatest engine that never was. It took a small block Chevy engine, a 350, put 400 crank in it, 400 connecting rods, and then either 350 or 400 pistons in it. All right. And you ended up with 12-to-1 compression ratio, a heck of a stroke, and it was a massive motor. Yeah, you could self-destruct it if you pushed it a little too hard, but, but it was built. The block was cast by engineers with slide rules initially. And, that small block started out as like a 200 cubic inch engine and then getting punched all the way up to 400 before they discontinued and brought out the LSs.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, when you talk about overbuilt motors, the 2.3 Ford and the Pintos and the Ford Rangers, the twin spark ones, people were shaving those heads down, higher compressions, boosting them.
But the bottom end was sturdy enough because it was built in the days of, I don't know if that's good enough. Well, we got no way to really test the metal on that. So
more metal.
Let's just make it heavier and stronger.
Well, even the 22RE.
Now, 22RE, that's a classic. I had one of those, and you could bulletproof engines. Yeah. Nowadays, we've got metallurgy to a science of a little. Let's say we've moved a couple of decimal places to the right, and why would a manufacturer add more metal? That costs money.
Yeah.
Okay. If I'm building a 200 horsepower engine, the top end's built for 200 horsepower to produce it, and the bottom end's made to handle 200. and it probably won't handle 400.
Yeah.
All right.
They're just moving the weakest link.
Yeah, and you're just doing that. So to me, that's a sidebar comment that So one of the reasons I like my old 4-liter straight
That's what I was
six
gonna ask you.
is that it's still of that old genre. And, you can talk to folks who stroked them out to, 4.7, 4.8, and the bottom end's never been a problem.
Yeah, because we have 5 main bearing cabs or 6 or something like that. You know more than that.
7. You
Seven?
have
Okay.
one between each piston and the extra one on the end. Yeah. So whereas a V8 has 5. So it's all right. I've got more for less, kind of a thing.
Go I-Team 6.
So easiest thing to say on gasoline is if you're shopping for fuel, keep an eye on it. The places that move a lot of gas, if it's busy and it's moving a lot of gas, the gas will be fresh, and your engine will be happier. 2, if you got to leave it for a long time, if you're going on a trip and you're going to park your Jeep, I suggest you get one of the stabilizers and don't over add stabilizers, please. It's the recipe. If you read the thing,
Read the instructions.
Is ounces.
Yes.
Ounces, not bottles. Too much stabilizers will turn into gum, which will plug your fuel filter, jam up your fuel pump, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And most of us have fuel pumps hanging in the middle of the fuel tank.
And that's the thing I want to talk about real quickly is that, one, obviously try not to run your Jeep below a quarter of a tank a lot. And I was the biggest proponent of this. On my YG, you'd hear the pump go, woo. I'm like, time to get gas. Yeah, my gas gauge worked because I'm an idiot. But the
pump is
cooled by the fuel. And you could really start taking life off of a pump. Well, the other thing I wanted to find out from you about, though, is that we talked a little bit about is a non-ethanol gas. The JK had a stumble every now and then. And you'd just be sitting there and all of a sudden, and I'm like, and I did the tune-up on it, did all that. I started using boat fuel, the non-ethanol gas, and the stumble went away.
Okay.
And I ran non-ethanol in the JK, and I saw in the JK an increase of 1 mile per gallon. And so, and the inline 6 and the LJ, occasionally when I've had put the non-ethanol in there, it seems to run smoother. Now, is that just placebo, or do you think that's an actual something to that?
There's something to that in my book, but it's subtle.
Right.
Thing is, alcohol cools. Just take some alcohol. This is ethanol alcohol, not isopropyl, not wood alcohol. It's but get yourself some straight. Go to the liquor store and get yourself some 100% grain, and feel it. That this is what's in ethanol enhanced. They call it fuels. It's a coolant. It does several things. It has energy. It has a lot of energy. All you got to do is take a look at alcohol funny cars to ask yourself, well, isn't that cutting my fuel? Not really. There's a lot of energy in alcohol, but alcohol by its nature is a coolant. And I would tell you there's a lot of engines that are turbocharged that, have hot incoming charges that actually run better on the alcohol added fuels.
Yeah, because the kids at work keep talking about tuning their turbocharged motors to E85.
E85, because you're adding additional alcohol in that when it evaporates, it takes more specific energy for it to volatilize than per se the more active parts of gasoline. And so it helps to cool the incoming charge. Well, that's great if you need it. If you don't need it, it can actually suppress ignition. Okay. It can actually suppress the burn. And it's the equivalent. The best way I can describe it, it's almost like running with retarded timing on an engine. If you've ever had an older engine where you played with a distributor,
right?
And if you run it a little low, it starts easier, but it just doesn't develop the power.
Yeah.
And ethanol can do that. And again, it's fractional. That's why the government limits 10%, because automotive manufacturers are having a hard time going, okay, how do I know this is here? Where you're pushing me to the point that if I detune the engine, I lose too much power, which costs fuel economy, which lowers the overall fleet economy, and that's a bad thing by the government. If I don't have it at all, then it can, do I set my timing to the other end? And where do I have the computer figure out where it is?
I need that sweet spot.
Yeah. And so they limited it to 10% because most of the engine program parameters, stock engine program parameters, can handle that little bit of alcohol, the cooling, without any noticeable degradation in performance. Now, noticeable degradation in performance. That's a computer sitting on a dynamometer. You and I drive our vehicles every day, hours at a time. We are incredibly used to even the slightest hesitations, the slightest handling differences, the power differences.
Right.
Most people, and I'm going to be a little broad spectrum on this, if it starts and gets them to work, they don't really get too carried away with the details.
Yeah.
There is a difference. Now, to those who say alcohol is no good, again, or alcohol doesn't give the power, watch a alcohol funny car. Google alcohol funny car explosions.
Yeah.
And see what happens when their timing gets off.
Yeah, we talked about it.
And you'll find out why they put belts on blowers. Because if you get the timing off and you get a backfire in an alcohol-fueled vehicle, that back pressure creates a sudden, very dynamic compression, ignition of the incoming fuel-air mixture with enough force to blow a 671 blower clean off the top of a big block and scatter it into the crowds. So the thing is, honestly, could we run vehicles happily on 100% alcohol? Yes. If they were tuned for it, they'd run like crap if at all on gasoline.
Yeah.
Can I run a straight gas engine on straight alcohol? No. Okay. That's a completely different timing, versus what runs on gasoline, different compression ratios. The alcohol likes a little bit more than the stock. And I think I got that right. Forgive me. Those of you in the alcohol funny car world can let me know if I got that backward.
You're allowed one mistake in 92 shows.
Yeah. So there are some issues there, but I don't think it's totally unreal because manufactured vehicles all have a tolerance.
Yeah.
You may get a Gladiator that doesn't really, it tolerates alcohol, but it's not real happy on it. It's pushing the limits because it's made within a band, a tolerance.
Right.
On the other hand, somebody else may get one that, this thing loves it. This just loves it. It doesn't like regular gas at all. I get all kinds of better mileage and get up and go with the 10%. There's really no happy answer there.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So is it bad? No, the days of it being bad for an engine were the older cars who had the older gaskets and older seals and hoses that were not alcohol compatible.
Right.
And they would swell, break down, clog up systems, and it was holy Hades. But today, every vehicle coming out of, for U.S. market has to be capable of operating within its specified parameters.
With 10% ethanol.
With 10% ethanol. A few smaller group that are E85 compatible can go with 15%.
The Charger was E85.
Yeah. And that just means that they were willing to use wideband O2 sensors, a wider programming map into the computer to go, okay, I don't know what fuel I've got in there. They use optical sensors because theoretically the E85 is supposed to have a different fluorescent dye in it so that it could kind of get an idea of the percentage and adjust its timing and its. Someday we'll have the engines that you can dump anything in the tank and it'll probably burn it, but we're not quite there yet.
You do. It's on those deuce and a half trucks. What do they call it? An burn engine or something like that?
Yeah, GM did that for a while. Yeah. Even in the Humvee, it was
a little thirsty.
Be a little thirsty. So, anyway, that's a little more than most people probably want to know about gasolines. But the key is, believe it or not, unless you've made changes to your fuel system and compression ignitions, what the manufacturer recommends is probably what you need to do. Now, you get up there, and if you're in the high altitudes, Kurt, I'm talking to you, in Colorado, and she starts to do that, and it's not a valve tick, but that little kind of sounds like small marbles in a tin can. Yeah, go ahead and put premium in. It'll probably be thank you for climbing the hills instead of pushing a hole through a piston.
Small marbles in a tin can. That's my autobiography. I
And
can't.
he's back at it again,
Absolutely.
folks.
But gas is pretty much is it is what it is.
Well, it is,
For the
but you
most
know,
part.
you can look around, and is it better to buy at the high dollar or the low dollar? You know,
If it's moving fuel,
if it's
out of there.
moving fuel, you're okay. Now, the other thing I will tell you is, okay, I don't know about you guys, but I'll just use the slightly altered tank. It's a whopping 14 gallons. Now, if I'm scraping empty and sweating that I'm not going to make it around the turn without the thing sucking air, I can maybe put 12 gallons in it, okay?
Yeah.
And it's chugging as it pulls up to the tank. Now, 10 cents a gallon difference. Most people be running for the penny or 2 pennies, but 10 cents a gallon difference with 12 gallons.
It's $1.20.
It's $1.20 difference. I don't know about you guys. I'm not a spendthrift. I don't throw money away. But if I look over there and there's 42 cars backed up, and I look over here and it's 3 cents more, that's a quarter.
Yeah.
I'll spend an extra quarter to save
Yeah.
the time. But do the math in your head, folks. It's
Yeah.
we get hung up because of that number, and it's like, folks, I'm not seeing the economy here. My time's worth something.
My
So,
sister-in-law got an Acura. She goes, it's so much more expensive. You have a 13-gallon tank. It's 25 cents a difference in fuel.
Right.
By the time you add up, it's $2.87 difference
a month or something like that for her.
No, for a tank.
Oh,
and
yeah.
she's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So sometimes that's what you're paying for.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the four-cylinder turbos have to run 93.
Depends on their boost level.
No.
Now the other thing I will say, and I'll close out this little subject on that, is I do like using certain, like Chevron Techron.
Yeah, Techron.
And the reason I do that is I know my Jeep does sit, 1. 2, I drive it in dusty, dirty environments, and it's called Florida sand, or Georgia mountains with red dust. All you have to do is look at the inside of my Jeep right now. I still haven't cleaned up from Jeeping and Judd, and that was 4 months ago. And the inclusion of those dusts and dirt, as well as the high humidity here, water in gasoline creates sludges, that yellow, sticky, goopy. And about every 3 to 4 tankfuls, I like to add one of those fuel system additives to just help keep that part of my Jeep clean. And when we've done maintenance on it and I've pulled the tank down and checked inside, it seems to be doing the job. I do not have the guts to stop doing it and see if it gets gummy. So it could just be the fact that I keep fuel going through it and I buy good fuel, but that's a little preventative maintenance.
Hey, you're fine because my Jeep runs on the equivalent of old Roy, so we're good.
We're good. We haven't pulled your tank down to see what color it is inside, though.
Probably chartreuse. So with that, anything else you want to cover? Or?
No, you want to take your break and we head out to the garage?
Yeah, we'll take a quick gander out of the garage. We'll be right back after these messages from We Don't Have Sponsors. Hey guys, just want to take a quick moment to remind you to check out the shows on the I did it again, second show in a row, on the 4x4 Radio Network. Again, as usual, 4x4radionetwork.com. And again, also we have a Patreon page for those who'd like to donate to the show.
Yes.
And with that, we will get back to Kevin's Garage. There we go. How you doing today, Kevin?
Okay. Pretty good. Pretty good. Still chasing.
Hey, you swept since then.
Yeah, well, there's another story on that, too.
I'm suddenly nervous. I'm not standing on plastic, am I?
No.
Okay, good.
No. You know, we're moving forward on the plans to to build a new garage along with a new house.
The palatial Kevin studio / garage.
I don't know if I'd call it palatial.
Fine, the
maybe.
proper sawdust on the floor workshop.
Yeah, well, that's it, you know. But that's down the road a ways. That's down the road a ways. Look, folks, what I want to talk about this time is, you know, we kind of touched on it last time when Scott and I talked about working on the front end of his Jeep.
Yep.
And then chasing a leak in my electrical system, for lack of a better.
You know, for lack of better terms, Kevin, this is a current topic.
So I'm going to take the topic on slightly altered a little bit further. Now that I have discovered where my leak was, and I have an alternate electrical problem, and I thought I'd take you guys through. It's not solved yet, but the process of setting up to do the horrible thing that everybody hates.
Washing our clothes?
Close.
No, washing
I
a dog.
have a short in the electrical system that's blowing fuses.
Yeah.
How do you find it?
Well, one of the things we talked about on other previous shows is when we do projects about having the whiteboard roadmap. So you're not walking, you're kind of the idea of like bench building a Jeep, you're bench building your repair in a way.
Correct. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about here. Slightly Altered's had this intermittent problem. At least, let's see, this is 2020.
We went into
it's 6
2014
years when it first reared its ugly head. And that was fuse number 7 of the dash fuse set behind your glove box in a TJ.
For those of you who are wondering, it's next to fuse number 8, which is the ejector seat. Oh, wait, hold on. Only yours has that.
Yeah, well, we won't talk about too many of those options.
10-4.
This is your backup light fuse.
Yeah.
And mine just randomly goes, and I don't have backup lights.
I'm out.
Exactly. And it's gotten bad enough recently that I actually bought an entire little package of 10 amp.
He's got a garage of 10 amp fuses.
And it's not consistent. It's, it's not like every time I put it in reverse. I actually can have backup lights. At first I thought it's when it gets wet. Really, I looked at it and said, I put the LED rear lamps, the Savvy aluminum thin line that look like the Jeep factory tail lamp housings, but they're only an inch thick. And did I do something wrong there? I've already torn them apart, gone wire by wire by wire, checked them with the voltometer, and nothing.
Yeah, but you've had this problem before those.
Yeah. And so I realized I came to this epiphany going, okay, I am doing the classic random electrical search. That's a waste of time, a waste of energy, and intensely frustrating. And I think we've all done that, and Scott's over there turning purple. So what comment do you have?
What you need to do is you need to set traps and try and catch Kilroy. So like, do you set that thing of bolts on the floor?
The only way the U.S. took care of Kilroy was they convinced him to go over and annoy the Japanese and the Germans.
Google that, kids.
Yep. The original World War II gremlin. And no, not the movie. No food after midnight.
Getting close.
Yeah, or no water, whichever it was. Don't get them wet and don't feed them after midnight. So, anywho, what did we do with that? How did I set this up so that I can find the problem without going nuts, without spending a lot of money? I can throw money at it. I can start replacing switches. I can start replacing wire harnesses.
Right.
I can sit there and start pulling my Jeep apart, doing an eyeball inch by inch of every wire, and probably still miss it. So first thing that I did is, as I've told you guys, the best friend you can have if you own a Jeep is a factory service manual for that model Jeep, because it has a complete wiring diagram in it. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is when I dig into the service manual on that thing and I go to the section 8W, it says wiring. And you go to that section and you look in the little table of contents and it says backup lights. And you click on that and it takes you to a whopping 2 pages.
Wait. Back up. You mean to tell me it's only 2 pages?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The entire circuit is 8W51-4 and 8W51-5.
Trust me, kids, he really does have that.
I have it sitting here in front of me. Mm-hmm. And it starts at the main fuse block where power comes in. And it says, okay, off run F. I can't read it. 921. It goes to the fuse blocks under the dash.
Yep.
To the mystery fuse 7. Mm-hmm. And from there, it tells me where I'm going. And what it does is it lets me look at it. And it's kind of scary because it's what they call a single line diagram.
Right.
It doesn't tell you a lot if you just look at it. But when you start to understand what you're looking at, you go, oh, okay. So it comes out of the fuse box. It goes to a connector, C301. Which goes to then a splice, S108. And you're going, oh, whoop-de-doo. Well, these are all good bits of information, and I'll explain to you how. And then it gives me a choice. And you have to figure out that A/T or a M/T.
Right. Automatic or manual transmission.
Correct. And so mine goes down the automatic side. And it tells me the wire goes through connector C102 and 104.
Now, do you have to actually go C102 and 104?
I will, or actually did. And then it goes into
Sorry.
the transmission range selector, where it's just a switch.
Yeah. By the way, kids, that was a C, like the letter C in front of that.
Charlie.
I was trying to be smutty.
And then it comes back out through Charlie 102, 104, and then it tells me it goes out. It also tells me this neat little thing that it's lighting circuit 1. It's a 20 gauge wire. It's white with a light green tracer. Gee, wouldn't that be nice to know when you're trying to hunt down a wire?
Yes.
What color is it? It tells me it goes then to another connector, 301, and onto another splice, 311. You go to the next page, and gee, there's a kind of schematic picture of my taillights. And it says, oh, there's 301 coming in, and there's the wires. And it tells me another piece of information that it...
Zaya just fell off the back of the chair.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
She had a little too much catnip. It tells me that I have a T out of my circuit that I didn't realize that goes up and feeds my rear view mirror.
So just
because I have the compass temperature mirror.
Yes, you do.
Why does that have to do with the reverse lights? I don't know that question yet, but I'm guessing it has something to do with the auto dimming feature.
It very well could
That when
be.
you put it in reverse, it may no longer auto dim.
I didn't think about that.
But regardless, it tells me there is a wire that goes somewhere not expected.
Right.
Now, beyond that, I now can take a marker and go, okay, trace it out in yellow. That's what I do. I just print out 2 copies. And then I said, well, I know that if I don't put it in reverse, the light doesn't blow.
Right.
I mean, the fuse doesn't blow. Well, that means between the fuse and the switch, there's not a problem.
Okay.
Because think about it. If there was a problem between the switch and the fuse, it'd pop as soon as you stuck it in.
Right.
So it's only from the transmission range sensor back. So that gets me to the bottom of one sheet and the top of the other. And it tells me connectors. Now you go to the service manual and there's an actual whole section that says connectors and splices.
Right. And that's where you do
look
the
up
C
the numbers.
numbers.
And it tells me exactly, and I'm sitting here with a picture for Scott, that C301 is in the driver's foot well, just to the left of, right on the kick plate area, if you had a kick plate in the Jeep. And the other connector is connector 331, and it's right above it.
Exactly.
In the same location. So now I haven't even walked out of the computer, the office where I have the computer, and I know exactly where those 2 connectors are. And you can go to the S, and it will tell you the approximate location and a picture of where the splices, that's where a wire goes 2 ways, are. So now you can also, the pictures have a little diagram that actually show the bundle of wires and how they're routed in the body.
Right.
This is what I'm saying. So I now know that, all right, I need to start from the transmission switch back to the lights. Now, how am I going to check that? Well, I'm actually going to unplug the transmission, find that wire, okay, and I'm going to take my power probe, or if you don't have a power probe, you just have one of the little screwdriver thingies with a coil of wire and the light and the handle kind of thing, and I'll put 12 volts on that, and I'm going to find that wire that goes back to the taillight, and I'm going to put power to it and see if the taillights actually, the backup lights light.
Right.
And if I use a power probe and I have a short, it'll beep at me and tell me that there's a short. All right. If they light fine, I can actually power them with the power probe, leave it on, and then go start, as Scott used to say, go along the wire, trace the wires, and shake the bundle, and see if I can make it, tug it, pull it, wiggle it. If I make it go out, and I hear the beep, punk, and that usually is the fuse. It's a circuit breaker on the power probe pops. I can work my way down. If that doesn't work, I can go back to the connector, and I can open the connector up, and I can probe and test from that point forward. Long story short, I can go through step by step each segment without even having to actually open up the wire bundle until I get down to the bundle that makes the thing pop every time. I haven't even started the Jeep. I haven't put it in reverse or anything other than checking the wiring by connector to connector, using the factory service manual to tell me where to go find it, what color the wire is, Is it to the ground or is it otherwise? And work my way down to the suspect section.
Right.
And at that point, I can then do the unlooming if I have to.
Yeah.
Open
Hopefully
the
don't
split
come to that.
loom. Hopefully it's one of those things that you wiggle and you go along and you just kind of wiggle. And I may have Scott come over and help me because it's easier if somebody's watching.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do instead of a power probe is you can also hook up your voltometer to the continuity with continuity to ground, which is the same thing as a short.
Right.
And if it doesn't go right away, wiggle wires, tug, pull, move, vibrate, press until you get beep. Now, I'll be honest, if I use the power probe to get me down to a segment of wire, 2-3 feet, I would probably switch over to the continuity and go from one connector to the other. Now, the twist is with LED lights, they do ground at the end of the light. That may be enough to give a fake ground. Not enough to blow the fuse, but I may have to actually pull the tail lights off one more time and unplug them. Fortunately, when I wired in the Savvies, I wired them in using factory connectors so that I could unplug them. But go along, and I may have to unplug them just to not get a false read. But then I can sit there and do continuity to ground. And if I have a short, it will definitely read continuity to ground. And you can keep working down on the bundle, just pressing, because that's got to be what's happening is it's vibrating down the road.
Yeah.
And you get to the point that, okay, here it is. And if that doesn't work, Scott kind of tongue-in-cheek said, well, it seems to be more prevalent when it's wet. I will get under there with a spray bottle and wet the out of it. Yeah. Wear an old shirt and just get ready to get dripped on.
You got your goggles on and a Tyvek suit.
I'll need the Tyvek suit. Me and the Jeep Mud have been one many, many times before.
Well, you talked about like sometimes we just mess with the split loom and you can see the
you can open up and see the wires.
Well, not just seeing the wires, but you can also see the sand coming out of there. And not only does sand, while wet, make a great conductor, sand also makes a great abrasive.
Yes, it does, and it will grind through. But the key is for it to short to ground, it's got to be touching something on the chassis or the frame, where it's rubbed through, making contact. And that's most likely these intermittent failure points. And they can be frustrating to go through. But the key is if you have a wiring diagram and understand even the basics of electricity, that somewhere, like before, my electricity is leaking out. Now, this case, it's leaking straight out to the chassis, the ground, the frame. I need to find that leak. And you have to think of it as a leak and see if you can find that leak by working in sections. And your Jeep was assembled in sections. The cables are assembled in sections. The connectors, we've talked about the trick before, using an air gun or canned air to get into those little red sliders and blowing the grit out and working the connector until the lock slides finally over, and then the depression works till you can get the connector apart. And you're going to go through it and you're going to find it. I guarantee you're going to get to a point where you're going to be like, oh, look at that. It looks perfect till you kind of move it to one side. And then you're going to see probably a rubbed clean spot on the frame rail where the paint's no longer there.
You'll see witness mark.
And you'll see the split loom worn over, and you'll see dirty corroded copper showing from the wire.
Yeah.
And then you have to decide, okay, do I replace the wire? Do I splice the wire? Or do I just put a little liquid electric tape it up, and then put some armor on the split loom? Now, in my case, the split loom did its job for 140,000 miles.
Yeah.
So, we'll see how bad it is in that case. Worst comes to worst, one of the things I discovered with Scott and his parts side is loom pieces for most vehicles are not as expensive as you think. They're not cheap. They're not $10 or $15, but I remember we were looking for that harness, the engine harness on the TJ, and it was under $150 for the entire harness. And I don't know if today it's the same price, but that was surprising to me that brand new, all connectors in the factory, ready to drop on the engine and plug in. I was like, I was thinking that it would have been, thousands, and it's not.
That's the craziest thing. When I replaced the positive battery cable on my YJ, I was like, oh man, I don't want to sit there and rewire all this mess. Let me see how much. $53
for the entire. That was the crossover
battery,
front.
That was everything. There was the positive, negative, everything to the
starter
box,
and that stuff,
the whole nine. I'm like, Duh.
Yeah, so some of those things become easier, but you don't want to buy the whole Jeep's harness. You
Right.
know, you can find these things, but anyway, the sum of it is sit down, service manual wiring diagram, look at the component from the fuse to the end. You're going to find out that there's not as much you think of between those 2 points, and start looking for obvious places. In my case, look, I got one wire. The chassis is the return for the current back to the negative.
Exactly.
So I got one wire coming out of the battery that feeds the fuse panel, which has a fuse, which keeps blowing. From that point, it goes to the transmission. There's one switch. One. And then from there, it heads back to the taillights.
Yeah.
All right. Already, just talking it that way, it doesn't seem quite so insurmountable of an issue.
Well, no, it's one wire, and you have a roadmap, and you're thinking about it logically. And it takes a lot of the legwork,
And the anxiety.
The mysticism is out of it.
And then you take the rest of the book, which tells you, that bundle is routed here.
Yeah.
So this bundle for me, is actually starts on the firewall, and it doesn't run under the Jeep where I've been looking for it. It's the one that runs down the driver's side footstep, and then up along the B pillar, and then atop of your rear fender to the little grommet that goes up to your hardtop or down into your lights. So for all I know, I may not even have to get under the Jeep. I've been looking. In fact, you and I did it when we were under the Jeep.
Yes, we did.
We looked at the one that runs under the Jeep, but that's not the circuit. And I'm sitting here with a piece of paper that tells me that we're looking in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Maybe I did put a drill bit through it back when I put the steps on.
It could be.
It could be. Maybe it just got rubbed wrong, along the door jams. I don't know. But these are all, now that I know where the questionable wire runs, all right.
Now you know where to look.
Now I know one of the areas to look. Now I do know that the transmission switch wire is in there, but that comes back up to the front. That does not go to the back.
Right.
So this is how a service manual can really help you look at things and bench repair.
Right.
Particularly in the electrical, where you need to take your time, not sweating, cussing with sand falling in your face as you lay under your Jeep going, where is this repair? But rather, you can sit here and think it through. It's great when you have a partner who's willing to sit at the bench with you and BS about it, and you come up with a plan that you can approach. And the key to the plan, check it off in blocks, okay?
Yeah.
Test it in chunks. If you disconnect the transmission switch and put a jumper wire between the terminal coming in with power and out on the switch, which, by the way, the detail shows you.
Right.
And your backup lights come on and the fuse doesn't blow, well, it's probably the switch, okay, that has gone frizz. But in an automatic, in a TJ, that's a 42 RLE, that's an electronic transmission. If that switch was munged up,
you'd have shifting problems.
I'd have
too.
shifting problems. But the thing is, I expect I can do that and blow the fuse, but I don't want to blow fuses. So I'm going to use something like a power probe to put power in it, which can pop anyway.
Exactly.
And you just work in sections, disconnect, clean and disconnect the fitting at each one of these juncture points and take a look. And you somewhere along the line, you're going to, okay, yep, that popped. Let me move back to the next section. Oh, yep, I'm still got a short. Move a little bit further. And hey, look at that. I didn't get a pop.
Yeah.
Let's go back. How about this section right through here? All right, it's in this section somewhere.
Right.
Fine. Power it up. Listen for continuity now and start wiggling and fiddling and screwing around, and I bet you'll find it quicker than you think.
And that's the best part. And also, too, is when you take it step by step, if you get frustrated, you can walk away and pick up where you left off.
That's right. All right. I think you had an email request from a listener.
Yeah, Eugenio actually wanted to know about rear brake conversion on his TJ. He has a Dana 44, and basically wanted to know, is there a way you can do this kind of on the cheap? Not really cheap, but, cost effective, if you will.
Yeah. Near and dear to my heart, Eugenio, because that's what I did. I had a factory 44.
We just talked about this.
and I did the conversion, and it's often phrased as the ZJ conversion. There are two basic ZJ conversions, one for the Dana 35 disc brake and the other one for the Dana 44 conversion. Right. They're essentially the same with one significant difference. Both of them use late 90s ZJ components, is where you can get the same components.
Right.
The difference is if you can't find the mystical Dana 44 ZJ, that's a bolt-on for you. You can use the more common ZJ Dana 35 with a modification. And rather than me try to explain it all to you, I'm going to direct you to an awesome website that I used to do my research when I did this.
Yeah, this is like a plethora of TJ knowledge.
Ooh, nice words.
I got a word in edgewise.
And I've mentioned this site a few times before.
We got to give credit where credit's due.
But credit where credit is due. There's a gentleman out there. His name is Stu Olson. Stu, STUOLSON. It's Stu-Offroad, all run together, STU-OFFROAD.com.
I'll put a note in the
We'll put a note in there. Stu has this collection. A lot of it he's done, but even if he didn't do it, he brings in and vets stuff from other people. He presents it with photographs in most cases in a well-organized, kind of linear, this is how it's done. Yeah. And most importantly, Stu does the same thing we do. When things don't work, he puts it in there and tells you the foibles and the mistakes and things that might be better done this way.
Hey, I should have used this rotor instead.
Right. Yeah. His example was initially, folks, the Ford Explorer on the 8.8. The whole rear brake assembly is very, very, very similar. The castings are almost identical, but not where important. The end of the axle bolt pattern is slightly different from the Ford 8.8 and the Dana 44s, so you can't quite use those. But the rest of the parts fit. The calipers, the parking brake assemblies, and all that kind of stuff does. However, the actual rotors themselves, if you get the Jeep one, the hat of the rotor is slightly thinner, and the hat of the Fords is slightly thicker, just thick enough that you don't feel comfortable, particularly with thicker aluminum rims, that you got enough wheel studs sticking out there. So you may have to put in longer studs. But regardless, he has a great brake section in there, and he talks about the D44 conversion, including the one thing that's a little scary to some folks is that the D35 caliper mount, which will bolt right onto the 44 axle, no problem. The bolt pattern's the same for those 4 bolts on the flange and the axle tube flange. But the hole in the ZJ casting is machined slightly smaller diameter. It's perfect for the D35, but you can't get the seal assembly for the 44 through it. Before you panic, folks, a drill press and a drum sander will quickly, that's what I did on mine, you'll see that there's a little mill flange bevel, if you want to call it that, in the casting around the hole when it was cast, and they machine it to each size. And
he even has pictures on his site.
He does. And you just sit there and grind it till the bevel's gone. And then guess what? Then it fits the 44. And cast iron, I can't sand cast iron. Actually, cast iron sands pretty dang good. It's not steel, it's cast iron. And it took me maybe 45 minutes aside to sand out those openings.
Yeah, and because the taper, you know how much you're removing.
Yeah, the taper tells you exactly how far to go. And it's not even a precision fit. It's not like it's a machine. So if you are a little loose, it doesn't matter. The 4 bolts are what lines it up. It's better, obviously, if you do, grind fit until it snugs on there. You will have to get different grade 8 bolts, and Stu even talks about the fact of putting the bolt into the vise and milling one side down with just a flap wheel grinder so that it fits around the axle tube. Because if you look at normal stud bolts, now you can go to Jeep and you can get Rubicon axle studs. And I don't mean the ones that bolt to the wheel. I'm talking about the ones that hold the brake caliper assembly on. And of course, those would be perfect as well. But if you're looking for the low buck, grade 8 hardware, though.
Yep.
Critical grade 8, and Stu will tell you the same thing. It's a great thing to read. He goes through it. Take the time as he did and as I did, that once you get back with your parts, okay, I don't, I got the calipers. I left the rotors at the junkyard. I got the calipers. I got the parking brake parts. I got all that, including the emergency brake cables. Believe it or not, the ZJ's steel cables for your emergency brake, parking brake, call it what you will, on the ZJ is exactly the same as the Rubicon TJs, which have the disc brake.
Right.
So they're a drop-in fit. I made sure I didn't even get them from the same vehicle I got the rest of the hardware from, because the ones on that vehicle were too corroded. I found one that they were pristine, but somebody had already taken the brake sets. And there's a trick with a hose clamp, a little hose clamp you can throw around the little spider click in that holds the brake cables in, and you just tighten the hose clamp around it, and it will compress them, and you can pull them right out of their little snap-in holes, no problem. And I clean everything up. You know, it's tempting to get in a hurry and I'll just grind them and throw everything on. Take a little bit of time with a wire wheel and a wire brush and clean everything up, and then maybe even throw a coat of anti-corrosion paint on it. You're doing a little bit of investment in your Jeep. Be proud of it. Do some work.
And it's a safety item, too.
Yeah. Take your calipers in and use them as the core. Don't reuse the old ones. Just go in and buy new ones is what I did. I get the remans from, the parts store, but they always want a core. So I took the ones from the junkyard as my core.
Yeah.
New pads. Don't reuse junkyard rotors.
Yeah.
And there's no core on those for the most part. And they're like, well, what should I order? Well, you should order mine's a 2005 Jeep TJ Wrangler Rubicon.
Yeah.
With disc rear brakes. And guess what? The parts fit perfectly. As opposed to what it came from the factory with the drum brakes. And it's just, they give you the option in the parts book so you can get all of the pieces you need. If you really, want to go all new, you can go all new. There's all kinds of pieces available, even from the Jeep dealer. The casting is probably the expensive part, and that's the thing that you just do a little bit of grinding on, and it fits on, and it is the same part number between the two of them. So really, I did mine probably, I'm going to say 60% junkyard, and I waited. Our local pick and pull has
one of those sales.
Yeah, they have a 50% off and a 40% off. I think it's 40% off every 3 months sale. I just waited for that day, ran out, picked up everything nice and cheap, went home, cleaned it, derusted it. You did all my machine work. Total conversion took me about 6 hours. Now, the only thing I did different, and there's a lot of press on forums about this, is the proportioning valve. The Stu's site shows he went through several steps on proportioning valve. Some say, well, remove this O-ring. The other one, well, pull this plug and remove this plunger and put it back. What he's trying to do there is get your front to rear balance. In traditional drum disc combinations, you need a certain amount of what's called reserve pressure on the discs. On the drum brakes, so that the shoes stay close to the drum. If you look up the part numbers between a Rubicon proportioning valve and a disc drum sport, they're the same part number. Yeah. There's no difference. There's a lot of people that say, oh, you have to use a ZJ or your rear discs will lock up every time. I have not personally had a problem with that, and I've had some pretty hard panic stops, and it behaves like a normal Jeep. The only time the rear will lock up before the front is when my nose is down kissing the concrete, and I'm trying not to go up the back end of the guy who just pulled out in front of me.
Yeah.
And that's more because I lifted the rear end of the Jeep dang near off the ground.
But that's one of the things where your results may vary. Do the test drive.
They will. So you just put it together, bleed the brakes, bleed them correctly, because you are going with a completely open system.
Right.
And make sure you bleed them, pressure bleed them, reverse bleed them. I don't care how you bleed them, but get all the air out. If it's spongy, don't drive it, rebleed it.
Yeah.
In my case, what I found was with new components, I bled it. It was still spongy. I just said, leave it for the night. And that let the air kind of work its way out of the foams and the stuff from the fills. And
Pressure's equalized.
Bled it the next day. Tricks like tapping a little bit on the caliper, not beating on it, folks. Tapping on it lightly to help dislodge air that might be stuck to the new cast iron of the caliper. I managed to get it clean and clear. If all else fails, call a friend who has a pressure bleeder, or take it to a shop who can do a pressure bleed on it.
Yeah.
But anyway, take a look at stuoffroad.com. Stu's got all kinds of great information there. It's a great drool site because he just posts everything on there. So my suggestion is take a look at that. Yes, it is a doable job for anybody with a TJ who wants four-wheel discs and doesn't come from the factory with that Rubicon sticker on the hood.
There's nothing wrong with the Rubicon sticker on the hood,
No,
though.
I didn't say there was.
The best part is with that you'll have a inner working of how your system works.
Oh, yeah.
And you're not going to spend a lot of money for a kit. Nothing wrong with spending money for a kit.
If that's the way you want to go, that's fine.
But some people just like to tinker.
Yeah, and that's me. And the other thing is, please, this is just a personal. Don't ignore the emergency brake, parking brake. I've seen a lot of guys do this conversion because the hydraulic brakes will work fine if you don't put any of the parking brake, emergency brake essentials in that inner drum area. But you know what? That's your backup safety. If you blow your hydraulic lines, you rip one of the flex lines off on a rock, if you
stick shift Jeep,
whatever, it's not that big a deal to install it. The only challenge is study the cam, how it comes out, the actual lever cam that goes from the outside with the cable hook to the inside. It is possible to put it in backwards. Ask me how I know. Put the right on the left and the left on the right. And guess what? It looks right, but it doesn't engage.
Yeah.
So
I had the batteries in backwards.
Pretty much. Since I didn't really have an example to take apart.
Now you do.
See, normally I only do one side of it, any complicated brake assembly, and not that this is complicated, but and take the time to adjust the parking brake shoes so they don't drag, but they also are close enough that you don't have to pull the parking brake all the way up until it rips the top of your armrest off.
It's up to your armpits.
But it's a very nice system once it's installed. It is literally, I've had people look underneath and go, wait a minute, you have an SYE and disc brakes. This is a Rubicon. No, that's a 231. Now, granted, it's a 231 DHD, but
that's a previous show.
That's a way back show. But anyhow, I hope that helps you. Take a look at Stu's site. Give him props for basically becoming one of those knowledge bases for those of us in the Jeep world.
Pretty much. So anything else you want to cover? I think we're pretty much...
I think we're done for the day.
Cool. Yeah, it's been a long day. So on that, I think, Kevin, that besides the fact that, again, like we always talk about, take the few minutes to small business. And again, thank you to everyone out there fighting the good fight with everything. Again, hopefully the war hasn't ended by the time this show comes out. This is, again, show 92. And this is going to be, oh my goodness, we just did... That was April 15th. This is March.
This is when the world's supposed to come back to normal, but it hasn't quite got there at the time we recorded this show. So
wait, no, this is May. This is May 1st show.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so the next show would be April or May 15th.
Correct. I'm just hoping that by the time this show actually airs, the world is, at least we can see that the oncoming light isn't a train.
Exactly.
So... Having said that, Scott, we have definitely pushed this one out of time.
We had a couple of good long shows for you guys. Hope you enjoy them.
So, enough of what I do best, which is talk. Time for me to go out and lock my hubs, and both of us to put our Jeeps in 4-low and hopefully hit the trail.
And thanks for spending time for us. And as always, wheel legal.
Tread lightly.
Plus, take nothing but pictures, memories, and your trash when you leave the trail.
And be sure to check in for our next podcast of On the Trail with Kevin and Scott.
Yep. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Proceeding has been provided for entertainment only. Proper service and repair procedures are vital to the safe, reliable operation of all motor vehicles, as well as personal safety of those performing those repairs. Standard safety procedures and precautions, including the use of safety goggles and proper tools and equipment, should be followed at all times to eliminate the possibility of personal injury or improper service which could damage the vehicle or compromise its safety.
What he said. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. You guys have a great day.
Bye.
This has been a Bent Axle Media production.